And it's believed that that was a very, very big influence on Tony Williams,
Huh.
who would later go on to play free-form drum solos on tunes like on his record, Tony's record Spring. There's a tune called Echo that's just a solo drum piece, a completely free-form drum solo. On Miles Davis' ESP, a tune called Agitation, Tony plays a free-form drum solo at the beginning of that tune. And it's believed, I don't know if Tony ever mentioned this in an interview, but it seems like he may have been influenced by Pete LaRoca's approach.
What year was New Soil?
59.
59.
Very early for that kind of play.
Yeah. Wow.
But also a really swinging drummer, and a sort of looser drummer, maybe in some ways, a kind of a more rolling and broader kind of sound and broader approach to the beat. Not as, I don't want to say not as definitive, because I don't think you would necessarily get lost with playing with Pete LaRoca or not know where he is, but it was just a little bit, the edges were a little bit, I don't know, a little looser somehow, more circular feeling, maybe a little bit like you would describe Jack DeJohnette's time playing.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah, and maybe Pete was an influence on Jack in that regard. I'm not really sure. Pete also, all of these guys, I was going to say Pete has a great sound on all of these records, but all of these great drummers, I mean, you talk about the important jazz drummers going all the way back to Baby Dodds and Zooty Singleton. All of these guys got amazing sounds on the drums, and I think this is something that audiophiles should be paying attention to, because the drums are hard to record, and it's hard to get. I've been in the studio recording records, and I don't get a good sound on records. I never hear back a recording. It's very rare for me to hear back a recording of myself and be happy with the way the drums sound. Everything always, I feel like I sound like I've got kind of a thin sound. Things get kind of compressed, and I don't blame the recording engineers or anything like that. I think it's my own weakness as a player, and all of these drummers that we're talking about all had just marvelous sounds. The sound is big, and it's full and rich, but it's not overbearing. It's not covering things up. It's just big and wonderful. It almost sounds like they're playing on larger drums than I play on, but I know for a fact that they're playing the exact same type of drums, the same sizes as I play. They're not playing bigger drums or anything like that. They just got a bigger sound because they were just wonderful players. Amazing.
It plays into
players.
the myth of the drums is the easiest thing to play. Getting a good sound on a drums is the hardest thing. The horn player has a mouth and two hands. The drummer's got to control everything on like 5 different surfaces at once.
The drums are the easiest instrument to sound terrible on.
That's right. Exactly.
It's so hard to sound pretty and musical and warm and tasteful on the drums. It's nearly impossible. I've been trying for 40 years, and I can't
you sound
do it.
great. You're very tasteful and restrained.
Thank you.
You have a really nice sound on the kit.
Thank you. I try, but I'm nowhere near these level of these genius players at all. I mean, these guys, I mean, in so many ways, not just sound, but I mean, in so many ways, these drummers that we're talking about are geniuses of the highest level. I mean, we're talking like really like Nobel Prize winning genius level accomplishments and abilities.
Think about Tony, even Buddy Rich. I mean, people slag on Buddy Rich, but nobody's played a greater, more beautiful single-stroke roll than Buddy Rich.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's just insane when you see him do that. It doesn't even make any sense in a basic reality how he can do that, because it's perfect.
Yeah,
it's like whisper clean. It's really,
and you can
amazing.
Slow down, Buddy. You could slow it down to half speed, and it's just as even and beautiful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
No, Buddy was an amazing player too, man. I mean, he's underrated.
Yeah.
Buddy, like, is so he's the guy that still to this day everybody knows Buddy Rich or Ringo Starr. Our next drummer is Clifford Jarvis, who is probably of the three the least recorded.
I don't know much of anything about him.
So Clifford was born in 1941 in Boston. And there's an interesting parallel with him and Tony Williams. I think Tony is a little bit... Tony was younger. But they both knew each other. Huh. And Clifford was apparently... people may know or may have heard of a drummer named Alan Dawson, who was a fantastic drummer, based in Boston, but a little bit better known these days as a teacher. He was a very, very important teacher, initially teaching at Berklee College of Music, and then just eventually sort of had a teaching practice in his own home.
He had the ritual.
Yeah, the rudimental ritual he came up with, which is, I still love to practice that. It's
Cindy Blackman played that for me once. I was like, damn, okay.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. Yeah, he came up with all these sort of ways to practice the rudiments, which is sort of like the drummer's alphabet, and he came up with all these different ways of taking these old drum books, these sort of somewhat outdated drum books, and figuring out new ways to practice them and incorporate them into sort of modern jazz drumming. And he basically was not a teacher and was sort of convinced to become a teacher because of this amazingly young, talented drummer named Clifford Jarvis, he basically started teaching so he could teach Clifford Jarvis. And that was his first student. And not too long after that, he started teaching Tony Williams as
He's on
well.
a couple of Jackie Barrett albums, isn't he? That's
Clifford Jarvis?
No, Alan Dawson.
Alan Dawson. He was Booker Irvin's drummer of choice on a ton of great prestige records in the mid-'60s.
Super clean, right?
Yeah, the Space Book, the Freedom Book, the Song Book, these are great records.
Right.
Some of them were reissued by Analog Productions, maybe in the last 10 years on their Prestige reissue series. I don't actually have any of those. I have all of those on CD, but they're great records. And Alan Dawson and Jackie Byard was in that group, and Richard Davis on bass, and that was a great group. And Alan Dawson sounds brilliant on those records.
It cracks me up when I would see those live albums from Lenny's on the Turnpike.
Lenny's on the Turnpike, yeah.
It sounds like a bathroom stop. It's Lenny's on the Turnpike.
Yeah, no. It was a jazz club. I don't really know anything about the history of it other than I presume it was on a turnpike somewhere. Maybe it was on 95 or something on the way up to Boston.
Lenny's on the Turnpike.
That was like the place, man. That was a place where everybody played.
Right.
There are amazing photographs from that place. There was somebody who used to come in and photograph, and you can find all of those like on Flickr now. There's a lot of photos of Alan Dawson playing with different people.
Pretty soon they'll find tapes from Lenny's and your new Resonance LP.
I hope so. Yeah. So Alan was a great drummer and taught Clifford Jarvis. And Clifford Jarvis is an interesting drummer who, another guy with a great cymbal beat, great time feel, but a very different approach, and a very interesting approach to comping. So when we talk about comping so comping is sort of a term for accompaniment, and jazz drummers in the bebop era and beyond are playing time, as I was talking about before with Joe Chambers, ding ding da ding ding da ding ding da ding ding da ding on the ride cymbal, and then the snare drum and the bass drum they're kind of using as accompaniment, basically sort of a little rhythmic and melodic interjection into whatever else is going on in the tune, often having a bit of a dialogue with the soloist. So as you're playing ding, ding, da ding, ding, da ding, ding, da ding on the cymbal, on the snare drum, you might be playing got, da ding, ding, got, go, ding, da ding, got. This little sort of melodic and rhythmic sort of conversation that you're having sort of with yourself, also with the piano player, and also with the soloist.
Very good explanation.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. So Clifford Jarvis kind of had his own very unique and very distinctive way of comping. And he was one of the first guys, I think, to incorporate the bass drum a lot. Now, drummers like Kenny Clarke and Max Roach were doing this back in the 40s. They were playing the bass drum. But Clifford Jarvis kind of did it more. He was one of the first guys to play really intricate figures on the bass drum. So he would be playing a faster tempo, ding-a-ding, 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 and you hear him go, ga-go, 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 go, 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 like doing all these really complicated rhythms between the snare drum and the bass drum, but really like almost the bass drum, the rhythms on the bass drum were just as intricate as what he was playing on the snare drum. And he had a way of doing it that was really exciting and really helped sort of propulse things along and really help kind of goose the soloist. But at the same time, he was never covering anybody up. You listen to these records and he's doing all of this stuff, but it's always so tastefully done, and it always just helps to push things along, but never gets in the way and never covers things up. You can always still hear the bass player. It's really remarkable.
Wow.
So one of my favorite records, again, he didn't record that much, but Freddie Hubbard, Hubtones. It was around 62, I think. And what's really interesting about this record is this record has a combination of some really kind of mellow tunes. The first tune, You're My Everything, is a standard. It's kind of a medium tempo swinging tune. He starts off with brushes and then moves to sticks. And Freddie plays a long solo, and Clifford really kind of cools it behind him. He plays a great cymbal time, great cymbal beat, and plays some tasty comping behind him, but he doesn't really get too busy. He follows the soloist and doesn't really get in the way, and it's just nice, tasteful playing. And then on the next tune, sorry, not the next tune, on the third tune, Hubtones, it's a real burner, and it's like a completely different Clifford Jarvis. And this record, too, is the other one I brought. I should say that this version of Hubtones is a nice Blue Label 70s pressing, which are still somewhat of a relative bargain to get into. If you don't want to get into the Tone Poets, there's a Music Matters reissue of this, and I think maybe a Blue Note 80 or a Blue Note Classic. I'm not even sure. I can't keep up with them. But the 70s pressings are very nice too. So this is a Music Matters reissue of Jackie McLean Right Now with Clifford Jarvis on drums. And this is a record that really demonstrates Clifford's very intricate and a complicated and innovative way of comping, and with a very, very interesting and fancy rhythms with the bass drum. And there's a bunch of up-tempo tunes with very extended solos, and he just plays so brilliantly on this. And it's a completely different side to Clifford Jarvis, to the way that he plays on You're My Everything on this record. He really knew when it was appropriate to play this way. He knew exactly when to bring it on, and he knew exactly when not to do it when it wasn't appropriate for the tune. Again, like hearing things on such a genius level.
I forgot you're also a teacher. You teach at Juilliard.
That's right. That's right.
We're getting your staggered bio.
That's all right, as it's relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about that. You probably have to teach kids that. So.
Yeah, we talk about all these sort of things, actually.
What's that last record? Is that Blue Spirit?
Yeah, well, I brought this just because it's got half of it is Clifford Jarvis and half of it is Pete LaRoca.
Is Clifford Jarvis on Open Sesame?
Yes, he is.
Oh, he is?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's
plays great on that.
Yeah.
That's I didn't bring that because that's a better known recording of his.
Right.
But I thought I'd bring stuff that was maybe a little lesser known, or maybe showed some aspects of his playing that people weren't as familiar with. But this is a great record. It's a cool record that I don't think has been reissued, at least not since the 80s. I think maybe in the 80s they did a vinyl reissue of this, but this is a cool record that I bought from you, actually, in the Jazz Record Center.
Wow.
It's just a cool record, cool Freddie Hubbard record with a lot of cool percussion and some great Joe Henderson on this record.
Interesting.
So Clifford Jarvis went on also to record a lot with Sun Ra. He was very accomplished in the avant-garde world. Clifford Jarvis is on a couple of really great Barry Harris records from the early 60s, and one of my favorites is one called Chasin' the Bird, which is a trio record. This trio with Bob Cranshaw, I believe, on bass, and Clifford Jarvis. And this is an early example of Clifford Jarvis playing a lot of that intricate bass drum comping, and it works so well on this Barry Harris record. It's a bebop record. It's a really inside bebop record. Now talk about versatility, man. To be able to play with Barry Harris and Sun Ra, that is genius right there. That is a genius drummer that can play with both of those musicians. I mean, those are two opposite sides of the spectrum as far as jazz, but Clifford Jarvis could make it work with both of them.
So you thought he was that great of a drummer?
Sorry?
You thought he was that great?
Absolutely. How can you play with Barry Harris and Sun Ra at basically the same time and not be great, not be basically a genius? I mean, that's so different, to be able to have the understanding to be able to play. I mean, to be able to play one of those styles takes genius.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Thanks so much for having me over. It's great to chat with you.
It was a pleasure. You have a wealth of information.
Thank you.
And knowledge.
As do you.
And maybe we'll bring out practice pads next time.
I'd love to. We'll work on our chops.
You can shame me.
Oh, no. No shame here.